Coming up on this week's episode of Search with Candour, I am interviewing Dana DiTomaso all about attribution in GA4, key events, conversions, all that fun stuff coming up on this week's episode. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Search with Candour. I am your host, Jack Chambers Ward, and I am joined by a very special guest this week, Dana DiTomaso. We're going to talk all about GA4 because Dana is one of my favourite people to follow to learn about GA4, and oh boy, there's a lot to learn about GA4 at any given moment. If you've been working in digital marketing and SEO for the last couple of years, I'm sure you've had experience with GA4 and found some difficult times, to say the least. I know I certainly have, and Dana has been one of my favorite people to follow on LinkedIn, on YouTube, through her podcast appearances, and learn a lot about GA4 essentially. The recent change from conversions to key events is kind of what kickstarted our conversation, and I'll put links and everything in the show notes for everything Dana and I talk about. Dana has some fantastic resources, like I said, YouTube videos and all that kind of stuff you should go and check out and get some more information from. But before we get to my interview with Dana, here's a word from our sponsors. Our sponsor for this week is Wix Studio, the web platform that gives agencies and enterprises the end-to-end efficiency to design, develop, and deliver exactly the way they want. Whether you manage 10 sites or 1,000 sites like some agencies do, here are a few things you can do from start to finish in less than 2 minutes on Studio. You can set up native marketing integrations with Google, Bing, and more in just one click. You can save so much time by reusing custom templates, widgets, sections, and design libraries across all of your sites, instead of having to build them from scratch each and every time. You can easily create seamless handovers by adding tutorials, guides, and more to your client dashboards. And speaking of dashboards, you get a full 360 view of all of your projects from one workspace with total control. And whether you're working your site with fellow SEOs, developers, other marketers, you're able to work on the same canvas at the same time with all of your team members. And of course, you'll be able to leverage some of the best in-class SEO defaults such as server-side rendering and automated structured data markup across all of your Wix sites. That is time up, I'm afraid, but the list keeps on going. Step into the Wix Studio by clicking the link in the show notes or the video description down below and see for yourself. Thank you so much to Wix Studio for sponsoring us here at Search with Candour. You may recognize my guest this week from talking in conferences around the world, a former SEO Speaker of the Year, according to Search Engine Land. Also, hosting radio shows, hosting YouTube, hosting courses across multiple different platforms. Welcome to the show, Dana DiTomaso.
Thank you.
It's very nice to have you on. I've been following you for a very, very long time, and it's really cool to talk about something I know a little bit about. I've done a course or two about GA4, but I think you are one of the people to talk about this subject and some spicy changes that have been happening in GA4 recently. So I guess I'll kick off with, why did you want to specifically speak about the topic we're going to be talking about, which is key events and perhaps the more broader topic of attribution in GA4 as well?
Yeah, I find I came to analytics from an SEO background. This is actually my 24th year working in this industry.
Wow,
I
congratulations.
started out making websites. Thank you, I think. I don't know, this gray hair is like GA4, a little bit of tag manager. But I find that, coming at it from an SEO background, one of the reasons why I got into analytics in the first place is because I was like, how do I know that my work is actually having a result, having an impact on our clients' businesses. And I find that a lot of SEOs are like, the attribution part of GA4, I don't know, I don't understand it. So this is why I end up spending a lot of time talking about this stuff, because I find that, particularly with SEO, it's a field where you can do well if you can prove your value. And SEOs aren't necessarily great at proving their value. They're like, I just like looking at websites and doing things on websites, and I don't necessarily like to do presentations. Here's a table, which is the worst way you can present, SEO results. But time. And so I find that by, at least, you don't have to be a GA4 expert, but by knowing, what a key event is, how it differs from a conversion, why the data is going to look different between the different parts of GA4, I think those are really key things to know, because if your answer is, well, this is this and this is this, and they hear from a PPC person who obviously is benefiting from the joy of conversion suddenly matching between Google Ads and GA4, and you're like, well, things are different for different reasons, and waffling a little bit, I think that can make you seem unreliable, while the PPC person is, laughing all the way to the bank. So SEOs, let's learn how to talk about data, and then we can have these better conversations and get raises, basically, is my overall goal.
Nice. I like that, as like everyone gets raises, everyone's happy. And I think that assigning and understanding your own worth, that's a whole other topic we could talk about for sure.
I've talked about this so much, actually, and I'm talking at MozCon this year, which may or may not, that's in June 2024. So whenever you're listening to this podcast, it may have already happened. And one of the things I'm talking about at MozCon this year is the idea of like, how do you report better? But it's funny because actually 10 years ago now at MozCon 2014, I gave a talk called Prove Your Value. And I had this little throwaway about like how to report on different stuff. And that's actually the beginning of my journey into analytics, was so many people had questions about this afterwards. Like, how do I report on this? How do I report on that? And it turns out I just really liked the data stuff. And I was kind of getting, I felt like I was kind of doing the same thing every day in SEO. It wasn't necessarily like my life stream. So I think analytics has been a lot more engaging, especially because it changes literally every 10 minutes. So
well, one of that changes, I know we were talking about it just before we started recorded. Obviously, you being president and partner at Kickpoint, and then founding and being the lead instructor over at KP Playbook as well. We were just talking about this, where you just recorded a bunch of courses and stuff, and all the like practical GA4 stuff is all ready to go. There'll be links in the show notes, by the way, folks. Early plug for that. You can go and check out all of Dana's stuff in the show notes and the video description if you're watching on YouTube. But they've had a change, and like you said, things change all the time. And I feel like SEO people talk about this a lot, but I think analytics is also very true, especially with the tumultuous time that has been the last 18 months, 2 years of GA4's coming, the big countdowns on the screen, the fear mongering and all that kind of stuff, and all that kind of thing. And
I feel like it didn't even work, because I have some people who were like, oh yeah, we set it up on July 1st. Like, no, don't do that. Or the new deadline, which is July 1st, 2024, which is when UA is going away. Your data is going to be gone. So if you need it, you should export it now. Okay. But I was actually I was doing an in-person workshop on GA4 in Australia. And of course, listeners might know that Australian time zones are a little bit different in North America. And GA4 likes pushing out updates in the middle of the night, North American time, which is the middle of the day, Australian time. So I literally had the interface change on me mid-training session. I refreshed a screen and I'm like, this is totally different now. Cool.
Oh my God.
So, and I have a whole preamble at the beginning of any workshop I deliver. It's like, GA4 could be changing at any moment. It could be changing right now. And then it actually came true. So
I feel like
when people are reading about GA4, like, check the date on the post, because it might be out of date.
That's tip number 1 from this episode, is make sure you're checking the date. Because I think when we talk about the changes in SEO, obviously the big thing we talk about is the core updates from search engines like Google, right? And we're at a time of recording, we're recording this mid-April. It's like day 40 something of the March core update, which is now more April than it is March at this point. Like, it's absolutely crazy. But you could, like you said, with analytics stuff, you get things that just change overnight. And if you don't read the documentation, if you're not actively keeping up to date, again, there's a couple of sources I use, including following yourself on LinkedIn and a couple of other people. Like, that's how I try to keep up to date with this sort of stuff.
The changes aren't even documented too. Like, sometimes they'll put out a change and I'll go and look at the what's new notes of GA4 and there's nothing about it. Like, okay, maybe they'll put it on tomorrow. Nothing. Like, all right, here's a change. They didn't mention it, FYI, and it's I don't know what at decision making at GA4 headquarters in terms of what makes it to release note or not, but sometimes there's just different changes in settings and things, and like, I would love a heads up that you've changed the name for this, or you've added a drop down for this, instead of me getting into there's more than one recording that I've made at a training video and I'm like, oh, this is different now. And I make my little note to myself that I make, so I remember when I'm editing the video to go back in and change the thing. Like, all right, I pause, revise the script, come back into it again. So it's fun.
I'm planning for this episode to go out in a couple of weeks, so hopefully they don't just completely change the game in the next couple of weeks.
Maybe they'll change the name of it. Maybe it'll be like, GA5 in a couple weeks. Who knows?
I'll have to ADR us and we'll just replace like 4 with
Yeah.
5 and just we'll just do it that way.
That'll be fine. Yeah. AI will do it for us.
I'll bring you back on the show just to record, like, could you just say GA5 in like 3 different voices for me? Like, excited GA5, sad GA5. I'm like, yeah, we'll work it out from there. But the thing we are talking about, I mentioned attribution, I mentioned key events, which is probably a term a lot of listeners and viewers may not have even heard at this point. And I guess we'll start there with, what are key events? Why have we kind of included that in the podcast title, and why is it something we need to talk about?
Yeah, key events are the items previously known as conversions, like Prince, the artist formerly known as.
Are they just going to be a symbol next? Like
yes. Oh, that'll be great. Yes, that's perfect. Don't give them any ideas, please. But yes, key events used to be called conversions, and a conversion is an event in GA4 because everything is an event in GA4. A page view is an event, a form submission is an event, everything's an event. So a conversion used to be an event that you promoted to a conversion. Now in GA4, that is now called a key event, unless it's imported into Google Ads. And so you have to actually go into Google Ads and import something. And you can only import something if you define it as a key event. And then once it's imported into Google Ads, it is promoted to a conversion. You don't manage conversions in GA4. You just see them in GA4. You actually manage them in Google Ads. And so the goal of this is that allegedly some advertisers, I'm sure some very, expensive advertisers over at Google who spend a whole bunch of money with Google Ads, were upset that conversions didn't match in GA4 with what they were seeing in Google Ads. And it won't. And so what they've done now is they've defined conversions are going to have the same attribution windows, the same attribution, basically journey. You're going to have the same reporting. And so they're going to match up between what you see in Google Ads and what you're going to see in GA4. And then the rest of us who don't work in paid get stuck with key events, and they can show up 3 different ways depending upon what you've got set for everything else, and good luck. So that's basically why it is key events. And I get why Google made this change, because if people don't know, if listeners don't know, the GA4 team is actually under the Google Ads team. So that's part of why Google Ads changes in GA4 obviously are prioritized, because that's the priority of the Google Ads team. And, ads is what makes the world go round at Google. So it makes sense to me that this change has been made. Is it annoying and weird and kind of like, what else? Key events, really? This is what we've come up with for it? And I get that part of it. I don't think anyone's going to start calling it like key event rate optimization. I don't think that's going to take off. You're not going to say, I want my website to key event better. Like, I make jokes about it in my videos. But I just think people are still going to say conversion when they actually mean key events. And so even like in our reports, for example, when we report in Looker Studio as opposed to reporting in GA4, we're still calling it conversions, even though technically it is named a key event. Just because, again,
find replace all, like replace key event with conversion in Looker Studio. Like,
I wish I could do a find replace all in Looker Studio. There's nothing like that, unfortunately. You'd have to rename everything.
There's like Chrome extensions that replace like Donald Trump's face with cats and stuff, right? There must be somebody out there, you are smart listeners and viewers, go and build an extension that replaces the word conversion with key events and vice versa, so we can live our happy lives.
Yeah. Obviously an important tool for the world. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
So, I mean, I find that that's where, the name is weird and different. And so it feels like you're like, well, I can't talk about conversions now. That's just for ads people. You can certainly still talk about conversions. I think, especially if you're dealing with an agency and you're talking to clients, you're talking to different clients all the time, just make them aware of the change. But I think the most important thing to do is also explain why attribution can still be different in not conversion land and key event land, as opposed to conversions, which have, as I mentioned, that specific attribution model and that specific attribution window. And I think those are the things that get SEOs really tied up, because ads people are used to dealing with things like attribution windows. All ads products have a different attribution window. And what I mean by attribution window is, what is the time of period someone could have entered their ability to be attributed back to that ads channel. So for example, the default attribution window in GA4 is 90 days. So if I come onto your website 100 days ago and then I show up today and I buy something, it's not going to show up or attributed to how I originally got to your website, because that was outside of the attribution window. And attribution windows are different for different ads products. Like Facebook, for example, they have a 7-day click-through attribution window. It's something like Google Ads, you could set it to 90 days, you could set it to 30 days if you want. And what you should set the window at really depends on what makes sense for the business you're dealing with and, what their sales cycle is like. Sometimes I wish I had a longer than 90-day attribution window. For example, like if you work with a home builder, for example, people don't like go down to the store and buy a house that day. Like some people do. Some people are very quick purchasers. Other people will think about it for 6 months. And so in that case, you really struggle with attribution windows because they're so long. But if you work in something like e-commerce and you're selling something, small that people might just purchase right away, you have a much easier time, I think, proving attribution than someone who's working with, or B2B scale products, which take forever and it may not be the first person who found you who ends up doing the purchase. And it's just a nightmare when it comes to attribution.
It's coming back around to that value thing you mentioned at the start of the episode, right? Like where that credit ends up from. I think it's especially true in agencies where you're going to have maybe a different agency handling the paid side of things and one agency handling the organic side of things, and then maybe another one handling the Kero, Kero, is that what we're calling it now?
Yeah.
The CRO new word.
Yeah, we can figure out how to pronounce it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's like a different team handling content and a different team handling social, and everybody wants their own little piece of the pie, right? So you can slice the data different ways and be like, look how good our stuff is. We've decided to report on this. And then another team decides to report using a different model. And a different team is like, well, we're going to use this report. And suddenly none of the reports match up. And the client is like, why are all of you lying to me?
I have had that almost exact conversation with the client once where their paid agency was reporting a particular kind of way, and it was freshly swapped over to GA4, so everyone was a bit nervous. We're all treading very lightly, trying to make sure that the client knows what we're talking about, and this is before key events, and God forbid when I have to have that conversation with them next week. And it was an element of like, well, it says on GA4 that we've done this, but if I look in UA, it says this. And according to the paid agency, it says this. And according to you, it says this. There are 3 or 4 different versions of amounts of money. How am I supposed, this is the marketing manager, how am I supposed to report this to, the upper management? How am I supposed to understand, like, oh, if we're, at a very difficult financial time here in the UK and around the world for many people at the moment, like, I need to justify my budgets. Should I be spending more or less on ads and more or less on SEO and content and all this kind of stuff? And we all kind of looked at each other like, so what method are you using? Which choice did you click on GA4 to work out and understand? And I know there's a lot of questions around that. Like, I think the first last click kind of stuff, a lot of people are kind of familiar with those terms. But then having a lot of that terminology, again, talking about conversions and key events and stuff, kind of fade away. And now using terms like data-driven and the difference between the different sides of things. From your perspective, are there kind of like a go-to best way to kind of get an idea, or is it more of a case-by-case basis for us SEOs?
It is more of a case-by-case basis, but I think that there's some general rules of thumb that you can apply to your specific situation. And I do want to remind people as well, if you are working with clients or in-house and your clients or your in-house team are looking at GA4, don't forget that you can rename reports in GA4. And the only people who know that you rename them are you and your team. So if you need to name a report, Mike, only look at this, then you name that report, Mike, only look at this. And that's okay. I'm not going to judge you. I literally have a report called Mike, this section is for you. So like this is Mike. Yeah, I mean, honestly, well, Mike's a great client. He's very engaged. I love working with Mike. But I think that that's where it's a matter of, and I opened up another GA4 from a training I was doing, and it was called Cheryl's report. Like, you know what? You go, Cheryl, because you made that report and you know it's for you and you've named it such. And I think that people are really like hung up on, oh, well, we have to name things fancy stuff. Like, no, you don't. You call those reports whatever you want. No one's going to know. Only the people who have access to GA4 are going to see that. So you name the reports what makes sense. And if you're going to call this report, our top level attribution or whatever it might be, like you might run out of characters at some point, but you think about what you're going to name that report, what's going to make the most sense for you and your organization and your team. So don't feel like you have to be stuck with the default reports in GA4. And I have some videos on YouTube about how to change the reports and how to rename the navigation. So definitely take a look at those. And I think certainly you need to decide what is going to make the most sense, because when you go into GA4, you not only have the attribution windows and the 90, 30 day, 60 day, whatever you're going to set, you have the attribution model that you can choose of last click or data driven. And then in last click or data driven, you can also choose to only consider paid channels Or you can consider organic, which isn't just organic search, it's literally everything else, including paid, that might be other paid stuff if it's attributed incorrectly. So you really need to think about, like, how are we going to attribute stuff? I've gone into GA4s and I've seen that the paid team has changed the attribution model, pardon me, to only give credit to paid, which of course they would. But then
Natural,
you're like,
yeah.
no, don't do that. Like, please change it back to this. There's a change history as well, so you can see when they did that. But certainly, make sure that that's set how it should be, and that if people are going to go in and change it, like, check the change history and make sure that it hasn't been changed on you. Because this is part of it too, is people want to get credit, and one way to get credit is just by saying that paid channels only get credit, and ta-da, the paid team looks great. But then there's two acquisition reports in GA4 on top of everything else. There's the user acquisition report and the traffic acquisition report. And the user acquisition report is the very first way that user, and if you're not watching, you're listening, I use quotes when I say user, got to your site. And then traffic is the most recent, like the first click of the last session that converted. And the reason why I say the first click of the last session that converted is because there's a thing that happens in GA4 that didn't happen in Universal Analytics. A really common thing that people do is they like search for coupons. So let's say you work in e-commerce and people put an item in their cart and then they decide, oh, I'm going to see if there's a coupon for this product. They open up a new tab, they search your brand name plus coupon, they find an affiliate site. They click on the link to apply the coupon to the cart. In Universal Analytics, what would have happened is that session would have broken. And then that person would have now been attributed to affiliates. What happens in GA4 is the session doesn't break. It still is attributed to however they got there, the first part of that session, because they haven't, the session didn't break because the session was already active. And so now the affiliate doesn't get any credit at all. So GA4 has been very bad for affiliates because affiliates were typically like that last click part of that overall session. They weren't necessarily as top of funnels. They wanted people to think that they were, affiliates. And then the other thing too is that because it doesn't break, but then what happens is if I come back the next day, and let's say I come back via direct, I just type it in to my browser, I might get attributed to affiliates because GA4 is trying to do the last non-direct. And because the second part of my active session from the day before was affiliates, when I come back the next day via direct, I could be attributed to affiliates, which feels like a bug to me in GA4, but it is something that you need to be aware of if you think that people are coming back to the site multiple times during the same session, or if you are using UTM tags on internal links, which you should never, ever, ever, ever do. Please don't use UTMs on internal links. It broke things in UA. It breaks things in weird different ways in GA4. Just don't do that. I still see people doing that. Please don't do that. There's my PSA for today.
That is going to be the first social clip I do from this episode is do not use UTM links for internal links.
Sad. Yeah, make me sad. Yeah. Anyway, so when I talk, sorry, go ahead, Jack.
No, please carry on.
I was going to say for user, when I said user in quotes, I think the other thing too that people don't understand is that users aren't tied together across devices unless I am logged into your website or you have figured out some other magical way to get people to tie together. Maybe, I filled out a newsletter form on your website. You set a session cookie saying that you're, I am this person. And then I somehow also signed up for your newsletter on my mobile device. And you set a second cookie saying this is this person. You brought those two together. Maybe you somehow did that. That's also another way to do it. But most of the time, unless someone is logged into your website, you do not know that they are the same person across devices. They typically show up as two users. So I find that the word user in general is really misleading. I think that honestly, unless you are tracking user logins in GA4, you should just go through and rename user to say device. Because I think that is a much more accurate representation of what's actually happening. And I think that that's one of the big things that people misunderstand. So then when you're thinking about, all right, so what's the right report for us? Is it user acquisition or traffic acquisition or device acquisition versus traffic acquisition? The question is, what's going to make the most sense for how your business works? So for example, if you're working, a lot of our clients are in local SEO. If you have someone calling you and that first touch is most important, let's say you're using CallRail for call tracking, you want to know how people got to you the very first time they got in touch with you, then user/device acquisition is probably the way to go. But if you know that you have these long-term people are going to touch multiple times, and what's most important is what is the thing that sealed the deal, then maybe traffic acquisition is the best choice for you. Or another thing you can do is you can pull up the user/device acquisition report click the little plus symbol next to the first dimension, which is the actual acquisition channel, and then you'll add in session as a secondary channel to that report. And then you can see a combination of the first dimension will be the first way people got there. The second one will be the most recent way people got there. And then you can look and see, are there a lot of differences? And if there are, then that can also help to inform. Or maybe that's what you report on, is that combination of first and final. There's lots of different ways to do it. And there's also some great multi-channel funnels as well in the advertising section of GA4, but you can only access them if you have a Google Ads account. Now, what I've been telling people is if you don't have a Google Ads account, just go get one. Don't spend any money. Just attach it to your GA4. You should be able to unlock those reports. So that's another option as well.
That's really interesting, because I was having this conversation with a client the other day, the comparison option there of trying to help them understand the difference between the user and traffic acquisition and stuff, because I had an email from them saying like, hey, my revenue numbers are different to what I'm seeing right now, are different to what you sent me on the report a couple of weeks ago. What's going on? And he just like screenshot the table to me, and I was like, why does yours say that and mine says this? Let's go and have a look. And actually, like you said, being able to customize stuff and add stuff in, for me, has been the biggest positive for going from Universal to GA4. Like having custom reports, like you said, even if you're doing silly things, do it like have Mike's report, have Jack's report, whatever you want to do. And just the ability to then like remove stuff from tables. Oh, this client doesn't sell stuff. I don't need to track revenue. It's cluttering up all of my reports. Just get that out of there. Like there's so many options to customize stuff and change things, and the comparison side of things I think is really powerful as well. That's been really helpful for me, who really only dips into it every couple of weeks or so to check in on client accounts. I'm not kind of head down on it every single day. And I think it was a really interesting for my client to see that and be like, oh right, yeah, it does actually matter how much money is coming from this channel here, or like you said, where the first touch or the last touch of that last session is and where things are coming from. I find it really interesting that so many people kind of tend to stick with one and just kind of leave it, and as long as we don't touch it, it'll be fine. But actually you might find listeners and viewers out there experimenting with stuff and having a look at what might actually, and having these kind of conversations, whether that's with the rest of your team, whether that's with your clients, your internal team, whatever it is, get an idea of what would be best for the business. And like I said, with different kind of cross-channel stuff, I always find that the client kind of has a rough idea of what is going on, of like, oh yeah, we tend to get more kind of this kind of historically we've had this kind of data, and that's where we're leading from. But actually, when you look at the data, stuff has changed, and as we were just saying then, so much changes in digital marketing over the years and stuff like that. I find it really interesting when it can suddenly like open a whole new world and a whole new perspective for me as an SEO, let alone the client who is kind of just looking at the reports and stuff like that.
Yeah, they're only looking at the reports because you're having a call with them. Otherwise, they don't think about that. They're thinking about their business, right? And I think that's something as well to remember. Working with clients in particular, like you are just one small part of their day. You don't want to be the most annoying part of their day. So part of it is like, don't make it difficult for them. Like if you can do things in GA4 to make it easier for the client when they go in there, or a lot of the time we'll just give a Looker Studio report to a client. We make a dashboard that's unique for them. And honestly, like they'll use that, and that's their source of truth. And we'll explain to them, the data we're showing here might look different from GA4, and this is why. And the other thing too that I've been letting people know to remember is some people will say, how do we do today in GA4? If you look at the today or yesterday view, you might see a lot of sessions showing up as unassigned or like weird data showing up. It takes at least 72 hours for GA4 data to process. And sometimes they could change stuff up to 7 days later. So also keep in mind that, your data isn't necessarily finalized, which if you work in a field where real time right now data is really key, GA4 may not be the best fit for you. Maybe there's a different tool that's going to be, maybe you'll end up using something like, I don't know, Amplitude or something like that, if that's what's really key for you. And I find that that's something as well, just understanding the data limitations of GA4. Maybe GA4 isn't the best fit. Maybe GA4 isn't the right tool, and that's okay. I'm not a GA4 salesperson. I don't care if you switch to another tool, but if you use Google Ads, you kind of have to use it at least a little bit for that, attribution side of things. So there's that.
I find the delay in the attribution side of things, like you said, that 72 hours can be up to a week later. So I had a conversation with the client, and the paid team were on the call as well. And the numbers from the previous month that they were now comparing on this report were different to what had been reported in the previous report, because they had done it on the first of the new month to report the previous month. And they were like, well, it turns out that it's not, 20,000, turns out it's 25,000 or whatever it was. Like, why is this number in April different to how it was in March when you've already given me the March report? What is going on here? And we had a whole discussion about this, like the delay here. And like you said, if you need those day-to-day, moment-by-moment reports, I find it really interesting when I'm talking to people about like specific campaigns and they need, okay, we're doing like a weekend sale or a really, really quick kind of turnaround time of this is only going to be happening for a matter of days, and I need to report this as soon as it happens to the bosses. I'm like, yeah, good luck with GA4. You're going to need some way of
and sometimes too, it's I find too that I'm telling people, like, especially if you need to report on that sort of thing, like getting down into the nitty-gritty of attribution isn't just possible. You just can't do it. So if you're running a weekend sale and you need to go on Monday morning and give a report of sales by channel, like, good luck, because it's going to be really difficult for you. But the other thing too is like knowing that that is going to be part of your job. I think that should influence the choices that you make in terms of the tools that you use for reporting. And so maybe, if you're running an e-commerce site, like maybe you're going to use the Shopify reporting instead of using the GA4 reporting. And maybe you'll just dig into GA4 for things like, engagement measurements, engagement events. Maybe that's what you use GA4 for, because the other problem too is that people use ad blockers, right? People say no to being tracked with cookies. And so a lot of the time, these people just aren't going to show up in analytics at all. You can hide yourself from analytics, but you can't hide that you bought something or you filled out a form. So the other thing that happens is that clients will say, well, I see, $90,000 in sales in Shopify, and I see $78,000 in sales in GA4. Why are you lying to me? Well, no, those 12,000 people said no to being tracked, or they turned off their ad blockers. And of course, your e-commerce product is going to be your source of truth, because you need to be able to ship products to people. So you're going to have to know the sales and everything else, but they're not going to be attributed because they hid themselves. And the same thing too with like people would say, I have, 38 form submissions in HubSpot, but I only see 30 form submission events showing up in GA4. Why is that? Well, those 8 people said no to being tracked, or they have an ad blocker. And that's, it can be up to the most recent studies have shown that maybe up to 50% of Americans, I haven't found any data for the UK, but up to 50% of Americans could be using an ad blocker. And if you work in advertising, that number goes up to 66%, which we are all ruining it for ourselves, because we don't want to be tracked. We just want to track everybody else, right? Like, I'm running an ad blocker right now.
I do this too. Guilty. If I say no to the cookies, I'm like, oh, I'm sorry, analytics team. Yeah. I'm sorry, you guys.
I know, right?
I know my wife is a habitual decline all cookies kind of person, and I saw her do it on a site the other day, and I was like, oh, those poor digital marketing people on the other end of that site. They must be so annoyed with people like you.
It's so I'll actually give you a little preview of my MozCon talk, because one of the things I'm talking about there is like, how do you report on this stuff if you don't have that data? And one of the things that I'm talking to people about a lot is efficiency. The idea that you can take 2 overall metrics that don't necessarily rely on people saying yes to cookies, and then compare them to see how you're doing. So for example, you could take a look at the number of impressions that you have across different channels. You could look at organic impressions, social impressions, paid impressions, and then divide that by the number of conversions that you see in your e-commerce product. Do those things need to be attributed equally? No, just all you're doing is taking these 2 numbers and dividing it. You'll end up with a percentage. And then from there, if you spend more money on paid, did that get more or less efficient? Did that number go up or down? If you do a lot of work in SEO, did that get better or worse? Did that number go up or down? And that can be a really nice overall just, are we going in the right direction, or are we suffering from, this is badly targeted, or we're not reaching the right audience? Those kinds of things. Because I think that can be a really nice overall, are we going in the right way type metric that is independent of any measurement tool. For example, if email marketing is really the thing that you focus on, look at the number of emails that you send out and compare it to the number of sales that you get. It doesn't have to be just attributed as email, just in general, especially if you have like in-store sales. People aren't going to walk into the store and say, hey, staff, guess what? I have an email. Like, show their email. Like, make sure that when I purchase this thing in the store, you attribute it to email. and it's that obviously is not going to happen, right? So instead, just think, I sent out this number of emails, we got this number of sales. Next week, I sent out this number of emails, we got this number of sales. See if that percentage goes up or down with the number of emails that you send. Then you can look at your efficiency. And so I think that that's a really nice overall metric that kind of gets away from the idea of attribution, instead focuses on here's all the different stuff that we're doing. Is it paying off?
Yeah, I find that especially you said like the footfall walking in stores and stuff like that
Mm-hmm.
can be such a fascinating kind of, it seems like it should be obvious because it's the one of the older forms of marketing. It's the non-digital type that we should all be used to at
Mm-hmm.
this point, but actually kind of combining all of that. I think there's I don't know how true this is. I've heard it quoted many times, but you interact or see a brand 9 times before actually buying from them. You'll see an ad
Mm-hmm.
on a bus stop and then see something on a social media thing, and then they might pop up in a SERP here and there, and you just keep
Mm-hmm.
and eventually go, actually, yeah, I do need a new sofa. Interesting enough, I saw
Mm-hmm.
them advertise that thing on social media, and then they pop up again. You're like, oh yeah, I was thinking about that brand, and
Mm-hmm.
the fact that you're not even clicking on anything, so there's no option there's no click
Mm-hmm.
attribution models, like,
Yeah.
and then
Well,
eventually you walk into a
sometimes I
store. So yeah.
and you buy the person. And I wonder too if that 7 times thing was invented by a salesperson who's like, I need to sell more bus ads. How do I do this? Oh, right. You have to see me 86 times before you go ahead and convert. But I mean, I do think that people do need to see the brand reinforced several ways. But even in the cases of when, for example, pest control, like I live in an area of Canada where it doesn't get as cold as the rest of Canada. I live on Vancouver Island. And it's lovely, but it also means that the bugs don't die in the winter. So we have to get sprayed for ants every year to make sure the ants don't take over the house. And so we needed a new pest control company. I Googled pest control companies near us. I found one that had good reviews. I was like, your Google My Business page is great. I'm going to make sure to reward you with some business. And then I did something I shouldn't have done, which was I texted the link to my wife and said, can you book the appointment? So she clicks on the link in her text messages. She books the appointment because she's going to be home to talk to them. And then now they're attributed to direct. So all that work that I did to make sure I was clicking on the Google Business profile listing, gone, because she wouldn't have gotten the tracking number. She wouldn't have gotten the tracking link, right? So that's another thing that happens all the time too, is like the person who ends up booking may have come via a Slack link, or may have come via a text message or a Facebook message or some other non-attributable method. And that also is not going to get better. That is just going to get worse with time. So that's the other thing to think about, is like you can't necessarily measure the outputs in the same way. So stop trying to measure the outputs in the same way. And I think, honestly, especially with what's happening in the EU, the default state of cookies in the EU may turn into be declined. Like, just accept it now that at some point in the future, you will have to choose to opt in, and opting and having it turned off will be the default. And people will have to be like, actually, yes, I would like you to track me. And they may not even see a dialogue. Maybe they'll have to like make a choice somewhere on the website. They'll have to like scroll to the footer and click on please track me or something like that. Right. So I just think that this is not going to get better. I think this is going to get worse. And so really thinking about a way to divorce your dependence on attribution, and instead focus on, these inputs of impressions or emails sent or whatever it might be, compare it to sales, that may end up being the way you have to go.
Yeah, I find that stuff so interesting. The sharing links thing, I think, is so true. It's something
Mm-hmm.
you just like sparked a whole other conversation in my brain. Then of like, oh yeah, the amount of times I've shared a social link with a friend of like, oh, perfect example there, like, oh, I'm not going to be home when this thing happens. My wife's going to be home, so
Mm-hmm.
I'll let her deal with it and call and whatever and all this kind of stuff. Or like, oh,
Yeah.
it's so and so's birthday. Let's book a thing. This is literally a thing. I'm going to a birthday thing I've booked at the weekend at time of recording,
Mm-hmm.
and it was the other people in the group chat, like all sharing different links in a WhatsApp chat and all this kind of stuff. And I assume people are finding it on social. Might have been somebody searching on TikTok, somebody searching on Instagram. I'm searching on Google
Mm-hmm.
because I'm an SEO. Somebody was. I was about to say somebody searching on Bing, but let's not go crazy. And it was this kind of like all these different sources and all these different things, and people were saying, "Oh, I found this place." Like, where did you find that place? What is this? We're trying to do like a VR escape room as part of the
Mm-hmm.
birthday celebrations. And I was like, where did you find this thing? It's like, oh, I saw this on Instagram. And then somebody did a, escape rooms near us search on TikTok. And there was a whole other element of it. I was
Mm-hmm.
like, these are completely different experiences. Obviously, we know they're essentially completely different results from each platform to platform. And
Yeah.
then trying to work out and you finally get that little form in. Please leave us some feedback. How did you hear about us? Depends on who fills out that form at the end of the day. And that's that moment where you actually get that chance to be like, was it word of mouth? Did you see us on Instagram? Did you hear about us on Google and all this kind of stuff?
And people aren't necessarily going to remember as well the 18 different ways that they saw you. So we were working with a home builder, and they would ask when people went to go check out the show home, how did you find out about us? People would be like, we saw the sign. Yeah, you saw the sign when you were driving there because you knew you were going to be driving there. You didn't see the sign and then suddenly decide we're going to buy a house today. It's people are really bad at filling those out too. So, I would say as a marketer, I think it's really important to make sure to tell, if you know that you broke your attribution path, tell the company how you found them, make a marketer happy today. Or in some cases when I'm like, this was a really great ad, I'm going to buy something because of this ad, I'm going to make sure that my ad blocker's turned off. I'm going to make sure in this attribution, I'm going to give them one attribution that they can trace, and it's going to make them so happy.
Go out there, listeners and viewers, and make a marketer's day. That's what we need to. That's the message we want to send here on Search with Candor.
Every time you turn off an ad blocker, a marketer gets their wings. Yeah.
And then they go on YouTube, and it's all hell has broken loose, and oh no. So coming back round, let's kind of wrap things up and talk about some cross-channel attribution stuff. We mentioned conversions in the paid sense. We've mentioned key events now in various different forms. What are the other kind of things do you think SEO should be measuring, paying attention to, all that kind of stuff on the analytics side of things?
Yeah, I find with cross-channel, it's people are like, well, they landed here, but then they, I am top of funnel, or I'm mid funnel, or I'm bottom of funnel. And I think something to think about as well, and this is a report that we have that's quite fun. There's a tool called Branch Tools, which was made by 2Octobers in the States, and they export your Google Search Console data. And it's a really inexpensive tool, SEOs. You should go check it out. I really like it a lot. But one of the things that they do is they slot your keyword, the keywords that are searched for on organic on Google search into different buckets based on, you decide, what are our top of funnel keywords, mid funnel, bottom of funnel keywords. And then you can look at impressions and clicks by funnel position. And then that is a really interesting, clients love this report actually, because it tells them, are we driving a lot of top of funnel, mid funnel, or bottom of funnel traffic? And if I'm only driving top of funnel traffic, why am I expecting SEO to be the thing that converts? Because that isn't the job that we've decided SEO is going to play. SEO is going to be this top of funnel or mid funnel. But if you're driving a ton of bottom of funnel traffic, or you have a lot of bottom of funnel impressions, and they're not necessarily turning into closed business, like, you should see some attribution. Like, come on, you're going to see some attribution coming in. Then I think that that's where it's really important to know, are we actually targeting the right keywords? Like, are we showing up for the kinds of phrases that make sense based on where SEO sits in this client's or this business's sales funnel? And so I think really, and you can do this yourself as well. You don't have to use a tool like Branch Tools. It's you can use a case function in Looker Studio, put in all your different keywords, and then say, I just want to see top of funnel, mid funnel, bottom of funnel. There's one of my courses, Analytics for Agencies. The default dashboard we have in there has a formula to build this based on your Google Search Console data. You don't need BigQuery or anything else. You can just do it right there on the fly. It loads faster if you're using BigQuery, of course, but don't feel like you have to. You can do this yourself in other tools. Anyway, but I think that that's where it's really important to know where you sit in the funnel. And then you can also categorize pages based on that too. Are most of the keywords for this page top, middle, or bottom? Knowing that if I look at this page as a landing page and I see that most of the keywords that come to this page are bottom of funnel, for the traffic I can attribute, are people converting? Is this landing page, let's say this landing page makes up 20% of our overall traffic. Am I seeing 20% or greater of the total number of conversions that the site sees coming from this landing page? No, then something's wrong with the page, or there's something wrong with the keyword intent, right? And so I often refer to this as like, is a page or a channel punching above or below its weight? Because I do boxing. That's what I think about it as. And so, yeah, if organic is 60% of your traffic, organic should be at least 60% of your conversions, right? And if it's significantly different, I'm not talking about a couple percentage points, because, that's just like a sneeze in the world of analytics. Like, if we're talking about you got 60% of your traffic, but 30% of your conversions are attributed to that channel, something is probably up. Maybe it is a measurement problem, but more than likely it means that maybe that traffic isn't necessarily relevant. So that's something to look at as well. well. And that's the kind of analysis that gets you out of focusing on rank reports and actually focusing on the stuff that really clients really like the stuff and bosses really like the stuff, because it makes it look like you are actually thinking about the overall business goals for that company. You're not thinking about, your little rank tracker land or whatever it might be. Because the thing is with rank trackers, like, please, I understand why people use them, but please never use it in a report to a client. Like, that's because the client's going to try to Google it and be like, well, you said it was fourth and today I see it's fifth. And then you have to explain personalization and everything else. Like, just don't. They're not actual like business data signals. Business data signals are, did people come to the website? Did they convert? Right. And that's where really, when you talk to clients, that's where your focus should be instead. So one of the charts that we have, and of course, I'll have to explain this. I do radio as well. And sometimes it's like, it'd be so much easier to show a picture when people are listening. If people watching this on YouTube, I'm just going to wave my hands around a lot. But one of the charts that I really like doing a lot is in Looker Studio, and it is a pie chart that is surrounded by a donut chart. I just do two charts, one laid over top of the other. The inner pie are conversions by device or channel or landing page or whatever it might be, looking at the top 10. And then the outer donut are sessions by device or channel or whatever it might be. And then all you do is you look at whether or not the size of the slices match up. That's it. And then visually, it is so quick for someone to see that and understand that this is working or this isn't working. And also, if you're trying to convince a client that their mobile site is trash, it's a really fast way to just run that by a device and be like, look, 40% of our visitors are coming via mobile, 2% of them are converting. Our mobile site is garbage. And then you're not worrying about numbers. It's completely divorced from the actual number of conversions, because all we're showing here are percentages. We're not showing how often something happened. We're just looking at whether or not the percentage slices matched up. And I think that's a really nice way to show the data in an overall way and get out of that obsessive, number crunching of, this is how we sold X. Well, I talked about at the beginning, Shopify says $90,000 in sales. GA4 says $72,000 in sales. Why is that? Well, instead it'd be like, well, 40% of your traffic came from this, 39% of them bought something. Great. That's totally on brand. That's what we want to see. 60% of your traffic came from this, only 30% of them bought something. Something is wrong here, right? And so that's a much more effective conversation and productive, frankly, because you can actually make some choices based on that, as opposed to getting obsessed with whether or not this person had the ad blocker turned on or not.
I love that visualization moment, because I think that really, really helps. Like you say, you get away from the nitty gritty, you're away from the numbers that a CEO or a head of department who doesn't have, like you said, only cares about the report because they're on the call right now and they have to deal with us SEOs talking about the numbers. Like, if you can show them visually and make it a way that they can then translate it to the other people who need to know. Maybe you're in my case, you're often reporting to like the marketing manager, who then has to go up and report internally, or whether you're internally and you're reporting to your line manager, who then reports it up to the senior management team.
Yeah. Make their life easy by giving them nice things that we can screenshot and then take up. One of the questions we ask when we start working with new clients is, what are the things that you are being measured on when it comes to a performance review? And we make sure that, especially if you're agency people, like, ask your clients this if you're not already, because if you can make a report that your client can then take it and makes them look good, you're going to work with that company forever. And if your client moves to another company, they're going to take you with them, which is one of the best ways to get new business, is work with in-house people who end up moving to different companies and taking you along with them. And they're, you end up being their pet agency. That's definitely one way to build that kind of great relationship, is to just give them something that is going to, and when I say make them look good, like, that implies a little bit of you're lying. You're not. It's just like, this is the way that they need to present data. And part of your job is to make sure that they know that they made a great choice in picking you as an agency. And part of, nobody's ever like, wow, that rank report was really great. People are like, wow, that company really proved their value. And that is how you build those kinds of relationships.
100%. I couldn't agree more. Yeah, that's that. Proving your value, coming back around. We're bringing it all full circle, right? That's, like you said, a talk from 10 years ago is now the end of this podcast 10 years later, and it's all full circle once again. So if the listeners and viewers do want to follow you, Dana, how can they check you out, follow your courses, follow your social posts, your YouTube channel, all that kind of stuff?
Yeah. So LinkedIn is probably the best place to follow me. I am still technically on Twitter/X, but I'm not really using it that much anymore. LinkedIn is the best place to follow me. So if you spell Dana D. Tommaso with really almost any variant of my last name, Google will figure it out and send you to the right place. Because I know people spell it all kinds of different ways. I see it on Search Console. Um, and my website
Oh,
is,
that's brilliant. That just
oh, yeah.
clicked with me like, oh
Oh,
my God, yeah, of course.
oh, yeah. I see some
I'm
wild misspellings. It's fun.
I've got a fairly easy to spell name, but I also changed my
Mhm.
name when I got married. I double barreled with my wife,
Mm. Mhm.
and I don't
Mhm.
think people are looking me up, to be fair. But plenty of there's just Jack Chambers, which was my name before marriage, and it's just like,
Yeah.
yeah,
Mhm.
okay, yeah, that's still a thing, and people are still like calling me that in various things, and
Oh,
I
yeah,
don't
when I
envy
got
you with
married,
a
my wife
difficult to
and I
spell
joked
name.
about that, but no, my wife also has a longish last name, and we decided that D. Tommaso Dryburgh was not necessarily gonna be a great combo last name, so we stuck with our own. So, yeah, it's not, doesn't
That's a
necessarily roll off the
as
tongue.
a
Anyway,
person who regrets it, it's a wise decision, my friend. It's a wise decision.
so my website is kpplaybook.com. We have a newsletter on there that we send out biweekly with our updates of like what we think is the most important stuff in digital marketing that happened in the previous 2 weeks. And I have 2 courses out right now. So the first one that Jack mentioned at the beginning is Practical GA4, and that is focused on somebody handed you GA4 and you were told to figure it out. This is the course for you. It takes you through GA4 start to finish, and I included a bunch of videos on specific use cases. So, real questions that clients and our internal team have asked us. And I walk you through how to answer these questions step by step. It also includes access to a community, so you can ask questions of me specifically, which, frankly, for $279 is like you get a personal analytics helper and you get all these different videos. There's over 6 hours of videos in there right now, with more to come as people ask me more questions. So, definitely check out Practical GA4. The other course that I have is Analytics for Agencies. So, agency people and some in house people. We have some in house people in this course, actually. This is for you. This talks about setting up and selling analytics from start to finish, including a default Google Tag Manager container, all of our analytics plans documents that we use at our agency. So, this is essentially what we do at Kickpoint and what I've done for years, and just hand it over to you and walked you through how to use it step by step. So, if you feel like your analytics at your agency is kind of crap, you can purchase this course. It's $979 per person. It also includes access to the community. And you also can do office hours with me where you can ask me your very specific, weird client questions, and I will help you get those answers. And I've been asked them some delightful questions in office hours. I think office hours is like my favorite part of doing these courses and working in the community, is just like the weird things that people have to, get asked by clients, or like the odd situations that people get stuck in. And not having that kind of support is really tough, especially I find there's a lot of in-house people going to Practical GA4, and like GA4 is not their main job. It's sort of off the side of their desk. And they just like, I just need someone to talk to about these things. So this is what I can help you with, is you can come talk to me, because this is what I do all day, is talk to people about GA4.
You're an analytics instructor and a therapist as well, so you can just give
There's a
people a
little
pat
bit
on the
there's a little bit of therapy in there. Yeah. And just but also less therapy, more just like, yeah, that does suck. I'm sorry that person asked you for that. Yeah. A
And
little
how
bit of
did that make
commiseration.
you feel? Yeah.
Mhm.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me, Dan. It's been a real pleasure. Like I said, I've been following you for a very long time, so it's very, very cool to finally have a conversation, sit down, pick your brain about GA4. And like I said, folks, go and check all of the links in the show notes. Everything we've talked about, all the resources, all the bits and pieces, you can follow Dana in the links in the show notes. So please go and check those out.
Thank you.
And that wraps up this week's episode of Search with Canada. Thank you so much for joining me. Whether you're watching, whether you're listening, I appreciate you joining me for the ride that has been season 3 of Search with Canada so far, that we kicked off all the way back in January at the start of 2024. I will have some more fantastic guests coming up. Big shoes to fill following up from Dana. I think it was a fantastic interview and a fantastic guest. But I will have some fantastic guests coming up in the not too distant future. Very interesting topics as well. Some stuff I've not really talked about on the show before, and I know I say that semi-regularly. A lot of the stuff does crop up again, and like, oh, I know I'm going to talk about that with a guest coming up. Some of this stuff I hadn't even really addressed in my professional career and really delved into much detail. So I'm very, very excited for some upcoming interesting topics coming up in the next few weeks and months. Of course, we'll be back at the end of May. Mark will be back here in the studio with me talking all the latest SEO news, so stay tuned for that. Of the usual monthly recap you've probably come to expect at this point if you're a long-term listener. And of course, like I said, I'll be back with a huge variety of guests and topics week to week, every single week. If you're tuning in, check us out because we're available every single Monday. So you can listen to us on Spotify if you're watching us somewhere. If you're listening, you can also watch us on YouTube. There is a full video podcast now, so you can go and check that out as well. Please do rate and review us and like and subscribe and all the usual stuff that will help us spread the word of Search with Candour and get us out there and seen by more professionals in digital marketing, and hopefully get more viewership and more visibility on these fantastic guests and their interesting topics as well. Huge thanks to Dana Di Tommaso for joining me on this episode, and a huge thanks to you for listening. And until next week, have a lovely week.